Feuer machen. Feuer!
On May the 7th, 1915, the British passenger liner Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat. 1,200 people lost their lives when this mighty ship sank in just 18 minutes. Why the Lusitania went down so quickly with such horrible consequences has been a mystery for over 80 years. Now, for the first time, the complete story can be told. In the summer of 1961, an American diver, John Light, was one of the first to try and solve the Lusitania mystery. The ship sank 11 miles off the Irish coast and now lies 300 feet below this spot. How could a single primitive torpedo sink a vessel the length of 2 football pitches in only 18 short, shocking minutes? John Light believed he had found the answer. The Lusitania was known to be carrying American ammunition for the British war effort. Light saw evidence of massive internal damage. He believed the ammunition had exploded, a catastrophe denied by the British government. In 1982, another team of divers, armed with a hard-shell suit and a remote-control camera, followed Light's trail. They sliced into the hold to examine the ship's cargo. What they found seemed to confirm John Light's theory.
Well, they were, in fact, artillery fuses, and we now know that when they were coming up from the bottom, they were, in fact, live. Now, the divers recovered almost 1,000 of them. They found case after case. We've also been able to trace precisely where they come from and what they are. Indeed, you can just read around the edge here that they were made by the armaments firm, the Bethlehem Steel Company in America in 1914.
In 1993, American oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, discoverer of the Titanic, wanted to use the latest in salvage technology to find out what sank the Lusitania. Dr. Ballard expected to confirm John Light's theory that the ship's cargo of munitions had exploded. But to his astonishment, Ballard found that the cargo hold where the munitions were carried was undamaged. So what did happen to the Lusitania? Lying half-buried on her damaged side, the ship is slowly disintegrating. It's getting harder and harder to find clues to explain why she sank so quickly. Today, computer technology can help solve the mystery. Using the Lusitania's original plans and engineering specifications, the computer can reconstruct her final moments.
Hexal is a software program to analyze damage, stability, and strength characteristics of vessels. Hexal can analyze various situations for us for flooding analysis, damage analysis, and stability analysis. We begin by modeling the vessel using lines, plans, and existing documentation to create a computer model of the vessel. Once we have the model of the vessel, we can run through a series of what-if scenarios. What we hope to determine is how much damage would cause the Lusitania to take the initial 15 degrees of list, and how much water would it take on, and what space it would have to be flooded and damaged in order to cause it to sink within 18 minutes.
The computer simulation will provide clues to solve the mystery of what sank the Lusitania. On May the 1st, 1915, the great British liner prepared to leave New York on her 202nd crossing of the Atlantic. Her master, William Turner, had worked his way up from crewman to captain in a 40-year career at sea.
Morning, sir. Morning, sir. Everything all right?
It was the Lusitania's 8th year on the New York to Liverpool run. 785 feet long, 32,000 tons. Few other liners could match her top speed of 24 knots. But this voyage had an ominous beginning.
Notice, travelers are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and Great Britain, and that travelers sailing in the war zone do so at their own risk. Imperial German Embassy, Washington, D.C.
The risk was real. Europe had been engaged in World War I for 9 months. The Atlantic was a battleground. The British Navy was trying to starve Germany into surrender by blockading food and supplies. The German response was all-out submarine warfare against British shipping. Submarine warfare had been declared in February 1915. In 3 months, 68 vessels had been sunk in the waters Captain Turner would have to cross. This was the war zone. The United States had not yet declared war on Germany. Because of this, the Germans avoided attacking vessels carrying American passengers. But the Lusitania's cargo didn't just contain passengers' belongings. The Germans knew that she was being loaded with ammunition for the British war effort. American President Woodrow Wilson was determined to keep the United States out of Europe's war. But passenger vessels were allowed to transport supplies to Britain. Germany warned that this use of human shields would lead to tragedy. In New York, a newsreel crew covered the Lusitania's departure. Most passengers dismissed the German threat as wartime propaganda. The Lusitania's passenger list was the longest since the First World War had begun. 690 men, 441 women, and 134 children boarded the giant steel ship.
We were to go on the Mauritania in the first place, but we had a maiden aunt live with us, and she paid the difference from the Mauritania to the Lusitania. That was our wedding present.
Well, I'd only been 3 years in this country, and I was one of these impossible old country emigrants, and I was longing to go home again. And I had this baby, and he wasn't well at all. The doctor said to me, "You'll have to take him away." Well, of course, I was charmed with the idea of going home.
We'd heard so many rumors of what the Germans were threatening to do, and I paid very little attention to it. In any case, I rather felt, oh, well, to hell with it, I'm going anyhow.
As the Lusitania prepared for her voyage, the journey of another vessel had just begun. The German submarine U-20. Her commander, Walter Schwieger. Schwieger was a top U-boat commander. He ranked 7th out of 30 captains in sinking British ships. Otto Rakowski was the U-20's radio telegraph operator.
30. April 1915 wurde die U-20 aus Wilhelmshaven aus.
On April 30th, 1915, the U-20 left for a long-distance mission. I was a corporal and a senior telegrapher on the U-20.
A cautious man, Captain Schwieger depended on an experienced merchant sailor, Private Lance, to help him distinguish enemy ships from neutral vessels.
Large English coal transport expected, starting from Liverpool, Bristol, Dartmouth. Get to the stations by the fastest possible route. Hold them as long as supplies permit. Submarines are to attack transport ships, warships, and merchant ships.
On the day the Lusitania set off from New York, Schwieger ordered Otto Rakowski to inform home base of their progress. From secret, recently declassified documents, the truth can now be disclosed. The British had been tapping German communications. London knew the U-20 was on its way towards Liverpool. The secret story of the Lusitania unfolded in a tiny, tucked-away corner of the Admiralty building in London, Room 40. The men of Room 40 were a top-secret intelligence-gathering unit, the nucleus of British code-breaking. Only a handful of British officials were aware of Room 40's existence. One was a politician with a radical vision of warfare, Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty. In February 1915, Churchill had written a chilling memo.
It is most important to attract neutral shipping to our shores in the hope of embroiling the US with Germany. We want the traffic, the more the better, and if some of it gets into trouble, better still.
The men in Room 40 knew the U-20 was on its way towards Liverpool. Top British officials were advised. But should the Lusitania be warned? May the 1st, New York Harbor. Lusitania radio operator Robert Leaf received telegrams warning prominent passengers not to sail.
Have it on definite authority, the Lusitania is to be torpedoed. Cancel passage immediately.
To this day, no one knows who sent those warnings. The first telegram was addressed to millionaire Alfred Vanderbilt, the Lusitania's wealthiest passenger. The second, to Broadway producer Charles Frohman. They dismissed the threat as a joke. At noon, the Lusitania was ready to depart. The newsreel camera captured this historic moment. These are the last images of the world's finest ocean liner, en route to catastrophe. As the Lusitania steamed from New York to Liverpool, Captain Turner read confidential instructions to the masters of all British merchant ships. They said,
If a submarine comes up close ahead of you, with obvious hostile intention, steer straight for her, at your utmost speed.
These instructions came from the Admiralty under Winston Churchill. The ramming orders turned the prow of the giant ship into a razor that could slice a U-boat in half. Churchill also ordered the secret arming of some merchant ships.
I attach the greatest importance to the use of merchant ships with a concealed gun to entrap submarines. They should cruise in the area of the raiding submarine, stop when they are challenged, and then sink the submarine by gunfire, taking the boat's crew prisoners, you're firing on them as convenient. Winston S. Churchill.
Churchill called his deadly fleet Q ships, wolves in sheep's clothing. Marauding U-boats dared not surface to give fair warning for fear of being rammed or fired upon. The rules of naval warfare had changed forever. German commanders suspected that even passenger liners might be armed, and they were right. In May 1913, the Lusitania had been equipped to carry powerful guns. 12 gun mounts were hidden on her decks under coils of rope. To the Germans, these measures made the Lusitania a legitimate target. But the passengers had no idea they were pawns in a new and horrible kind of war. To them, it seemed like a routine crossing on the most elegant liner in the world. A floating palace that offered regal accommodation, priceless furnishings, even a lift. The 42 men aboard the U-20 enjoyed no such comforts. Days passed unnoticed into nights in the cramped, stifling quarters. Diesel engines spewed fumes into the cabin as the vessel churned towards Liverpool. Caged mice were kept to warn of noxious air. The only diversions were a mascot dog rescued from a previous sinking and Captain Schwieger's gramophone. As the Lusitania approached the halfway point of her journey, the U-20 was rounding the shores of Scotland. Schwieger had spent the day playing hide-and-seek with British destroyers. He'd been forced to stay submerged and silent, running his batteries nearly dead.
Die Anzahl der Torpedos waren 14.
We carried 14 torpedoes, 4 torpedo tubes in front and 2 aft. We were heavily loaded, and we used to have them on deck and hanging from the side. We had 1 back gun and an 8.8 cannon and corresponding ammunition. Our objective was to sink ships. If something was in line with our torpedo tubes, it was sunk.
On May the 3rd, Schwieger got his first chance.
Herr Kapitän! Ja, ein Schiff! Was ist es? Ein dänischer Frachtdampfer.
Private Lance believed the ship was British, even though it flew the neutral Danish flag. Afraid of being rammed, Schwieger did not surface to give warning. The rules of war had changed.
Achtung, Feuer bereit machen! Abschuss bereit! Achtung, Feuer! Fehlfunktion! Nochmal! Feuer! Wieder Fehlfunktion!
The torpedo mechanism had failed. The merchant ship escaped. Queenstown, Ireland, gateway to the Atlantic. Since the war had begun, its waters had been infested with German U-boats. The Lusitania was still 48 hours away. Captain Turner kept to his normal routine. He preferred the solitude of the bridge to mingling with the passengers. Cruising at 21 knots, he knew that no U-boat could ever catch the powerful Lusitania, and so far there had been no threat. But 750 miles ahead, a fateful encounter awaited. The U-20 reached Ireland's Old Head of Kinsale and claimed its first victim. Captain Schwieger attacked a small schooner, the Earl of Latham. Unafraid of this harmless vessel, he surfaced and directed its crew to abandon ship before sinking her. No one was killed. Now Schwieger moved on towards Liverpool to attack the hub of British shipping.
11 p.m. Queenston to Admiralty, London. Schooner sunk by submarine off Kinsale at 5:30. Warn patrols.
The message reached London that night. Time enough to warn the Lusitania or send out a naval escort. But that night, and through the next day, silence. The Lusitania's passengers and crew sailed on, oblivious to the danger ahead. On May the 6th, Schwieger sank two more British merchant ships, the Candidate and the Centurion. Neither ship was brought down by a single torpedo. The Candidate remained afloat for 4 hours. Again, the crew escaped. Now Schwieger made the decision that earned him a place in history. This is how he put it in his log entry.
The voyage to the St. George's Channel has consumed so much of our fuel oil that it would be impossible for us to return to Germany if we had now continued to Liverpool. It is therefore decided to remain south of the entrance into the Bristol Channel.
Schwieger now backtracked to the Old Head of Kinsale. The U-20 and Lusitania were on a collision course. The Admiralty now knew that 3 British ships had been sunk by a German U-boat along the Lusitania's path. After a day and a half of silence, it was finally decided to warn the endangered liner. Thursday, May the 6th, 7:52 p.m.
Submarines active off south coast of Ireland.
Minutes later, a coded message was broadcast to all British ships.
Submarines are fast net.
But there was no news of a naval escort, no instructions to take evasive action, no orders to change course. The Admiralty's two cryptic messages remain controversial to this day. Turner took precautions. He ordered the lookouts doubled and the ship's lifeboats prepared. For the first time, the passengers were anxious.
Thursday, I noticed there was a difference among the people. And I didn't feel very comfortable Thursday night, but I didn't know anything about a warning.
The morning of May the 7th, 1915.
We ran into a very thick fog, and when we'd asked members of the crew why we were going so slowly, they said if any of the lookouts saw a submarine, the speed of the Lusitania would take them out of any danger whatsoever.
By late morning, the fog lifted. The coast of Ireland could be seen ahead. The Lusitania was approaching the old head of Kinsale, a welcome sight after 6 days on the open seas. 11:15 a.m. The Lusitania received a final message, but it was too late.
Submarines active in south part of Irish Channel.
The message had been sent by the ship's nervous owner, Alfred Booth. Schwieger's raids were already common knowledge in the Lusitania's home port of Liverpool. But no one informed the 2,000 men, women and children aboard the Lusitania.
I took my baby up after breakfast because we could see the coast of Ireland. I said, that's the place where your mummy was born.
At 2 o'clock, I was to go on the extra lookout in the eyes of the ship.
Well, I was at the wheel that afternoon. It was my trick from 2 to 4.
I went down to an early lunch, and then I went up to what was known then as the Palm Lounge.
As the fog now disappeared, we surfaced and continued above water. From a distant, far layer of haze, a large ship came towards us, holding course on us.
Hey, ist hier ein Schiff? Identifizieren Sie das?
Ein großer Frachter, Herr Kapitän. Ein Zwei-Master. 4 Schornsteine.
She had 2 masts, 4 smokestacks. We were given the alarm to submerge. Commands fairly burst from the commander. The ship was traveling diagonally to us, making about 20 knots. Underwater we cannot move this quickly, about 8 or 9 knots at utmost power. We made all speeds to get into the position. At 750 meters, we shot our torpedo.
Fire!
Schwieger described the attack in his log.
Clean bow shot, G torpedo 3 meters depth adjustment, angle 90 degrees, estimated speed 22 knots.
Torpedo off the starboard bow gun!
explosion of the torpedo, followed by a second explosion.
So I shouted to Captain Turner, she won't answer the helm, sir. All right, keep trying. Keep your eye on that spirit level on the compass. Sing out if she goes any further.
Come at once. Strong list. Position 10 miles south of Kinsale.
The commander looked through and he said, "That is the Lusitania being sunk now. And who wants to look through can have a look at it." It was a horrible spectacle, one must say. Women, children, and men were all running around in confusion on the deck, seeking some way of rescuing themselves. We could not surface, for we could not save anyone. We were fully loaded with 42 men. We would have been too heavy. We were truly sorry.
There's one thing I'm going to tell you. You don't think about God. You think if you're going to die, your mind would go to God. But it's not what you think. The thing was to get out. Get out, get out.
I got the baby in my arms and I went upstairs. There was so much shrieking and panic.
I saw the lift had stuck between the floors, and there were people inside. Those poor wretched people must have been drowned like rats in a trap.
I was scared, really scared. I couldn't think of anything or what to do, you know. And Harold, he had presence of mind to put the lifebelt on me.
The captain says the ship can't sink, and we're quite safe.
And I looked up and the Lusitania was just about ready to roll on top of us.
That's the only time I prayed. And I said, "Oh God, if I've got to die, let me die in the water."
I waved to my husband as he went down with the boat. As long as I could see him, we waved.
I'd swum, I suppose, about 50, 60 yards away, and then I saw her start to take her final plunge. People were jumping overboard, people were being thrown overboard, boats were being smashed to pieces. There was utter chaos until finally the waters covered her completely.
And the next thing I know, we were in the water. My baby gave a terrible scream and we both sank. And I came up and the baby was gone.
In some way or other, I got my arms over an oar and one arm through a life preserver with a dead woman in it.
You didn't hear many cries, but the terrible thing was people that swam up to you and begged to be taken in and you couldn't. We were packed, one on top of the other.
After 18 minutes of horror and panic, the great liner disappeared. No one, not even the German commander who sank her, could have ever imagined that a single torpedo could cause such destruction. The mystery of why such a mighty ship went down so quickly would remain unanswered for 80 years. It took 3 hours for the first rescue boats from Queenstown to reach the survivors. Far too late for hundreds who died of exhaustion and exposure. 1,195 died. 123 were Americans. The sinking was so sudden that only 6 of the 22 lifeboats reached Queenstown. 800 of the living moved about Queenstown in a haze of disbelief. Among them was Captain Turner, miraculously washed clear of the bridge. He wandered the town devastated and ashamed, while remnants of his magnificent ship washed ashore. The most elite of the Lusitania's passengers were not spared. Alfred Vanderbilt, Charles Frohman, art collector Sir Hugh Lane, writer Albert Hubbard. Of 134 children aboard, 94 were lost. The unidentified were laid to rest in mass graves. As Captain Schwieger neared port, radio operator Rakowski notified German command. The U-20 had fired only 1 torpedo and had sunk the Great Lusitania. The crew of the U-20 returned as heroes. In London, Schwieger's report was again intercepted by Room 40. The British feared the ship's cargo of ammunition might have exploded when hit by the torpedo, costing 1,200 lives. The intercept was suppressed. Unaware, President Wilson tried to calm his furious nation.
There is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. There is such a thing as a nation being so right that it does not need to convince others by force that it is right.
Wilson's pacifism was met with contempt. For many, the death of 123 Americans was an act of war. The public demanded to know how and why this tragedy was allowed to happen. Five weeks after the Lusitania disaster, an inquiry was called.
All rise for Lord Mersey.
The investigation was led by Lord Mersey, an eminent Liverpool barrister. Mersey was unaware of the flurry of letters being written by the Admiralty. A plan was being hatched to make a scapegoat of Captain William Turner.
I feel absolutely certain Captain Turner of the Lusitania is a scoundrel.
It is considered politically expedient that Captain Turner be most prominently blamed for the disaster.
One critic led the rest, Winston Churchill.
The Admiralty case against the captain should be pressed by a skillful counsel. We shall pursue the captain without check.
After 4 weeks of investigation, Captain Turner was found not guilty. There could be only one demon, the German captain, Walter Schwieger.
The whole blame for the cruel destruction of life in this catastrophe must rest solely with those who plotted and with those who carried out the crime.
But Mersey did do service to the Admiralty's cover-up.
2 torpedoes struck the ship simultaneously.
Schwieger's message, intercepted by Room 40, clearly stated that only one torpedo was fired.
The Lusitania was struck somewhere between the third and fourth funnels.
In fact, the torpedo struck much further forward, close to the ammunition. The Admiralty was desperate to conceal that the ship's cargo might have exploded. Exploration of the wreck proved their cover-up was needless. The ammunition was still intact. It clearly played no role in the sinking. It did not explode. If the ship's cargo of ammunition did not cause the second explosion, what did? Another theory came to prominence after the 1993 expedition. Below decks on the Lusitania, there were 3 huge turbines producing 68,000 horsepower, consuming thousands of tons of coal. The coal dust that gathered in storage bunkers in the center of the ship would have been highly explosive. Many investigators speculated that it was this dust, ignited by the torpedo, that doomed the Lusitania. But naval architect Blake Powell disagrees. His computer simulation of the disaster suggests that a coal dust explosion was very unlikely.
The Lusitania was designed with 4 main boiler rooms, all located in the center of the ship. The number 1 boiler room was the forwardmost. Behind that is number 2. And then number 3. And number 4 is after that. Outboard of the boiler rooms were the coal bunkers. Some people thought that the second explosion was actually a coal dust explosion, and it seems relatively unlikely. For an explosion to occur, it has to be under very, very specific conditions. There would have been condensation in the starboard bunker due to the cold water on one side and the hot boilers on the other side. And this also would eliminate much of the dust in the air, and most of it would have settled in pools on the bottom. It's unlikely that coal dust would have exploded under these circumstances.
The computer simulation provides an alternative theory to a coal dust explosion. According to computer analysis, the second explosion occurred in boiler room number 1, where icy seawater turned the fiery furnace into a bomb.
The size of the hole was approximately 20 feet wide by 10 feet high, and it was relatively high in the bunker. The amount of water that rushed in was in the neighborhood of 100 tons per second, which instantaneously flooded the bunker and caused a 15-degree lift. And the water that went from the coal bunker into the boiler room would rapidly come in contact with the starboardmost boiler. This hot boiler coming in contact with roughly 40-degree Fahrenheit water would have caused a steam explosion of that boiler. The explosion caused by the boiler would have been significant. It would have been felt throughout the ship. It would have caused damage to the bulkheads around the number 1 boiler room, which would, again, aggravate the flooding condition of the ship.
The computer simulates how a ship of the Lusitania's design behaves when struck by a torpedo. Now, answers emerge. The Lusitania was built for peacetime. Her designers never considered the perils of a U-boat's torpedo.
What we've been able to see is that the damage caused by the lone torpedo was enough to cause the flooding throughout the Lusitania that would lead to the progression of the Lusitania sinking. The exact location of where the torpedo hit was not critical to sinking Lusitania. More damaging was the operating condition that she was at, with the doors open so that flooding was able to progress from compartment to compartment. When she immediately lost power, the electric doors were unable to be closed, and this allowed large amounts of water to enter not only the number 1 boiler room, but spaces forward and after that. And as the ship went more and more nose down, the water that had flooded in is rushing to the bow of the ship anyway. If the flooding had been contained to the compartment that was damaged by the torpedo, the ship most likely would have survived. It would have taken on water and it would have healed, but it would not have been catastrophic. However, the compartment was open to other compartments, so no matter where the torpedo had hit in this area, it most likely would have exposed several compartments to flooding, causing the ship to heel over at excessive angles and taking on more and more flooding through the open portholes as well.
"11 miles from safety, the Lusitania had crossed from one era to another. Her sinking marked the death of innocents and the beginning of total war. The man who destroyed her, Walter Schwieger, was killed in 1917. His U-boat sunk by the British Navy. Captain William Turner survived another torpedo attack while commanding a troopship. 36 of his men were lost. Despite this grim record, Turner was promoted to Commodore of the line, but the Admiralty's indictment will haunt him for the rest of his life. Within a month of the Lusitania disaster, Winston Churchill stepped down as First Lord of the Admiralty. Churchill never revealed his knowledge of Room 40's secrets. Secrets that were kept from America. Even President Wilson was not informed that British intelligence had broken the German codes, and that the British knew Walter Schwieger's U-boat lay in the path of the Lusitania. If Churchill had intended to draw America into World War I, he underestimated American caution. 2 more years would pass without them fighting. But when the United States did join the fight, it was the Lusitania her soldiers vowed to avenge. A glorious ship was sacrificed. Her 1,200 passengers, pawns in a cruel new era.
Tomorrow night at 8, there's a change to the schedule as 4 heads off to Canada and to a place they call Polar Bear Alley. And stay with 4. Believe it or not, it's a normal day at Lagos Airport. Time for a good spring clean. Next.